Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The bullet grazed his ribs, a line of fire against the freezing rain, but Julian didn't stop running. He couldn't, not when stopping meant being dragged back to an altar that smelled of sulfur and sold souls. The neon lights of the lower district blurred into streaks of violent violet and acid green as he stumbled through the labyrinth of the slums. His Italian leather loafers, worth more than the entire building he was leaning against, slipped on the oil-slicked pavement. He clutched the crumpled piece of paper in his hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. It was an address. A last resort. A dead man's promise. If I go down, Marcus, his bodyguard, had whispered 2 hours ago, blood bubbling between his teeth as he held the study door against Julian's father's private security. Go to Kalen. Sector 4. Tell him the debt is called in. Julian gasped, the air in his lungs feeling like shattered glass. He was the heir to the vain pharmaceutical empire, the prince of pills. Yet here he was, shivering in a dumpster-filled alleyway, hunted like a fox by the very hounds his father fed. He looked up at the rusting steel door of the warehouse conversion. This was it, the den of the beast. He pounded on the metal. Once, twice, nothing but the distant wail of sirens. He pounded again, desperation lending him a frantic strength. Open up, please. The slide of heavy bolts echoed like gunshots. The door creaked open, revealing not warmth, but a terrifying void of darkness. Then, a figure stepped into the sliver of moonlight. He was massive. That was Julian's first thought. A wall of muscle clad in a black tank top and grease-stained tactical pants. Tattoos, jagged, tribal, scarred over, climbed up his neck and disappeared into a messy undercut of charcoal hair. But it was the eyes that froze Julian's blood. They were cold, predatory, the color of flint striking steel. And he was holding a gun pointed directly at Julian's forehead. Give me one reason, the man Kalen growled, his voice a low rumble of thunder. Why I shouldn't paint this alley with your brains. You smell like the upper city. Marcus? Julian choked out, his vision swimming as the adrenaline crashed. Marcus sent me. The gun didn't waver. Marcus hasn't spoken to me in 5 years. Try again. He's hurt. They took him. Julian's knees gave way. He slid down the doorframe, the rain plastering his platinum blonde hair to his pale, aristocratic face. He said, the debt is called in. The mention of the debt made Kalen's eye twitch. He looked down at the shivering, bleeding creature at his feet. A vein. He recognized the face from the news feeds. The sheltered, spoiled son of the man who ran the city. And now, Marcus, Kalen's estranged, idiot brother, had cashed in his life insurance policy to dump this problem on Kalen's doorstep. Kalen scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. Trouble follows pretty things like you, Vane. Please, Julian whispered, darkness encroaching on his vision. I have nowhere left to go. Kalen holstered the weapon, reached down, and hauled Julian up by the collar of his ruined silk shirt as easily as lifting a ragdoll. You die inside, Kalen muttered, dragging him into the shadows. I'm not cleaning up a mess on my porch. The loft smelled of engine grease, stale tobacco, and old blood. It was a fortress, not a home. Reinforced windows, multiple locks, and a layout designed for a siege. Julian woke on a leather sofa that had seen better decades. His side burned. He looked down to see his shirt removed, a stark white bandage wrapped expertly around his ribs. Across the room, Kalen sat backward on a wooden chair, sharpening a combat knife with a rhythmic shing sound. You're awake, Kalen said without looking up. The bullet just grazed you. You're lucky. Or small. Probably both. Julian sat up, wincing. He pulled a throw blanket over his bare chest, feeling acutely exposed. In the upper city, nudity was art. Here, under Kalen's gaze, it felt like a vulnerability. Thank you. Don't thank me. You're leaving as soon as the rain stops. I can't. Kalen stopped sharpening. He looked up, his gaze heavy. Look around, princess. Does this look like a daycare? I run a salvage yard, not a safe house for runaway grooms. You know, every screen in the city has your face on it. Julian Vane, kidnapped by terrorists. That's the story Daddy is spinning. Kalen stood up, walking over to loom above Julian. The size difference was overwhelming. Kalen was a creature of violence. Julian was made of glass. They say you were taken before your wedding to Silas Thorne. Julian flinched at the name. A visceral, full-body shudder that he couldn't suppress. Kalen's eyes narrowed. He was a man who read body language for a living. He saw the terror. Thorne, the butcher of the Southern District. Your father is selling you to him to merge the territories. It's a merger, Julian corrected softly, looking at his hands. A union of assets. You're the asset, Kalen corrected brutally. I won't go back, Julian said, his voice trembling but his chin lifting. I'd rather die in the gutter outside your door than go to his bed. Kalen stared at him for a long moment. He expected whining. He expected bribes. He didn't expect the steel spine beneath the porcelain skin. Marcus, Kalen grunted, turning away to grab a bottle of amber liquid from a shelf. Is he alive? He was when I left. He stayed behind to block the door. Idiot. Kalen took a swig, then offered the bottle to Julian. Drink. It'll kill the pain. Julian took it. It was cheap whiskey, burning his throat like acid, but he didn't cough. Why do you hate him? Your brother. I don't hate him. I hate who he works for. I hate that he became a dog for people like your father. Kalen leaned against the exposed brick wall, crossing his massive arms. And now, because of you, he's probably dead. And I'm stuck with the target. I have money, Julian tried, though he knew it was the wrong thing to say. Offshore accounts. I can pay you. Kalen laughed, dark and low. He walked back to the sofa, planting a hand on the backrest, leaning down until his face was inches from Julian's. Julian could smell the whiskey and gun oil on him. Your accounts are frozen, Vane. They tracked you the second you missed the rehearsal dinner. You are a ghost with zero currency. You are worthless right now. Julian swallowed hard, staring into those flint eyes. Then why didn't you throw me out? Kalen's gaze dropped to Julian's lips, then back to his eyes. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a strange, magnetic tension. Because Marcus called in the debt, Kalen said roughly, pushing himself away. And a Tauros never defaults. You stay, but you follow my rules. You don't leave this apartment. You don't touch the comms. And you stay out of my way. Days turned into weeks. The dynamic in the loft shifted from hostile captivity to a strange, domestic truce. Julian, stripped of his servants and luxury, proved surprisingly adaptable. He couldn't cook, but he cleaned. He organized Kalen's chaotic scattered schematics for the salvage yard. He learned to make coffee the way Kalen liked it, black as oil, strong enough to wake the dead. Kalen, in turn, stopped looking at Julian like a burden and started looking at him like something else. It happened on a Tuesday night. A storm had knocked out the power grid in Sector 4. The loft was lit only by the glow of emergency candles. Julian was sitting by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass, wearing one of Kalen's oversized hoodies that swallowed his slender frame. Kalen was stripping a rifle at the table. He watched Julian's reflection in the glass. The boy looked haunted, beautiful, and incredibly lonely. Stop thinking so loud, Kalen muttered. Julian turned, a sad smile on his face. I was just wondering how long it takes for a person to be forgotten. People like you aren't forgotten, Julian. They're replaced. That's what I'm afraid of. Not the replacement, but that I never really existed to begin with. I was just a bargaining chip. Kalen stood up and walked over. The proximity was suffocating in the best way. You exist here, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Julian looked up at him. Do I? Or am I just another piece of salvage you're trying to fix? Kalen reached out, his calloused thumb tracing the line of Julian's jaw. The touch was electric. Julian leaned into it, starving for contact that wasn't transactional or violent. "You're not salvage," Kalen rasped. "Salvage is broken junk. You're dangerous." "Me?" Julian let out a breathy laugh. "I can't even lift your toolbox." "You're dangerous?" Kalen insisted, stepping closer, boxing Julian in against the window. "Because you make me want to do stupid things. Like start a war with the entire upper city just to keep you here." Julian's breath hitched. "Would you?" "I might." The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision. Kalen kissed him like he was claiming territory, hungry and desperate. Julian responded with equal fervor, his hands tangling in Kalen's hair, pulling him closer. It was a clash of two worlds, silk and sandpaper, light and dark. Kalen lifted Julian up, pressing him against the cold glass, his hands roaming over the body he had sworn to ignore. For the first time in his life, Julian didn't feel like a prince or a pawn. He felt real. He felt owned not by contract but by choice. The bubble burst 3 days later. It wasn't a tactical breach. It was technology. Julian had turned on an old tablet he found under the sofa, hoping to check the news for word on Marcus. He had been careful using a proxy server, but he underestimated Silas Thorne's resources. The ping lasted 3 seconds. It was enough. Kalen was out on a salvage run. Julian was alone when the heavy steel door was blown off its hinges. Smoke filled the room. Julian scrambled back, grabbing a kitchen knife, a pathetic defense against the tactical squad that poured in. And then Silas walked in. He was handsome in a reptilian way, wearing a pristine white suit that remained spotless despite the wreckage. He smiled, teeth perfectly white, eyes dead. "There you are, my love," Silas purred, stepping over the debris. "Playing house in the slums? How quaint." "Get out," Julian hissed, backing up until he hit the wall. Now, the wedding is in 2 days. The flowers are ordered. Your father is very disappointed." Silas signaled his men. 2 guards moved forward, grabbing Julian's arms. Julian fought. He kicked, he bit, he screamed, but he was dragged toward the door. "Wait," Silas said, pausing by the table where Julian's coffee mug sat next to Kalen's empty whiskey glass. He sneered, sweeping them onto the floor with a crash. "Burn it. Burn it all. I want this rat's nest erased." "No!" Julian screamed as a guard doused the sofa in accelerant. Then the lights went out. Not just in the room, in the entire block. A sound echoed from the hallway, a wet, crunching noise. Then a scream. Silas frowned, pulling a gold-plated pistol. "What is that?" A body flew into the room, landing at Silas's feet. It was one of his guards, unconscious, arm bent at an impossible angle. In the doorway stood a shadow. Kalen. He was drenched in rain, holding a crowbar in one hand and a combat knife in the other. He didn't look human. He looked like the god of war. "You broke my door," Kalen said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in Julian's chest. "Kill him," Silas ordered, bored. For guards opened fire. Kalen moved with terrifying speed. He wasn't just a thug. Julian realized then that Kalen was a soldier. He used the smoke, the darkness, and the terrain. He vaulted over the kitchen island, the crowbar shattering a kneecap, the knife severing a tactical strap. It was brutal. It was bloody. It was a dance of violence. But there were too many of them. A guard pistol-whipped Kalen from the blind side. He went down, blood spraying from his temple. "No!" Julian wrenched his arm free from a distracted guard and scrambled toward Kalen. Silas aimed his gun at Kalen's head. "Filthy stray." "Wait!" Julian shouted, throwing himself between the gun and Kalen. Silas paused, arching a brow. "Move, Julian, or I'll shoot through you." "If you shoot him," Julian panted, his eyes blazing with a fire that had never been there before, "you lose the merger." Silas laughed. "You think you have a choice?" "I don't mean the marriage," Julian said, his voice steadying. I mean the accounts. The frozen ones. Silas's smile faltered. Why do you think I came here? Julian lied, his mind racing. Why do you think I risked this? This isn't a hideout. It's a dead drop. I used Kalen's terminal to reroute the encryption keys for the Vane fortune. All of it. The offshore holdings, the Black Ops funds. Everything. Julian stood up, smoothing his shirt, channeling every ounce of aristocratic arrogance he had been bred to possess. He stood over Kalen, protecting the wolf who had protected him. The keys are set to auto-delete if my heart rate stops, Julian said coldly. Or if I don't enter a code every 12 hours. Kill him, kill me, and you get nothing but a corpse and a bankrupt company. Your merger becomes a liability that will destroy the Thorne family. Silas lowered the gun. The greed in his eyes warred with his bloodlust. You're bluffing. Try me, Julian sneered. My father taught me well. Mutually assured destruction. The silence stretched, agonizing and thin. Finally, Silas holstered his gun. You have until the wedding. If you aren't at the altar. I'm not coming back, Silas, Julian interrupted. The deal is changed. You get the money, half of it, if you leave us alone. You refuse, and I burn the digital empire to the ground right now. Silas looked at the tablet Julian had held earlier. He looked at the unconscious guards. He looked at Kalen, who was struggling to rise, blood in his eyes. Half. Silas calculated. It was still billions. Without the marriage. Without the headache of a rebellious spouse. And you declare me dead, Julian added. A tragic accident during the kidnapping. Julian Vane dies tonight. Silas spat on the floor. Fine. Keep the stray. But if I ever see you in the upper city, Julian, I will skin you both. Silas turned and walked out, his remaining men limping after him. The room fell silent, save for the sound of rain and labored breathing. Julian collapsed to his knees, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Kalen groaned, rolling onto his back. He wiped the blood from his eyes and looked at Julian. Did you actually do that? Julian laughed, a hysterical, sobbing sound. I don't know how to code, Kalen. I can barely use a microwave. I was bluffing. Kalen stared at him, stunned. Then, a grin broke across his bloodied face. He reached out, grabbing Julian's hand and pulling him down until Julian was lying on top of his chest. You crazy son of a bitch, Kalen wheezed, wrapping his arms around him. You looked him right in the eye. He was going to kill you, Julian whispered, burying his face in Kalen's neck. I couldn't let him take what's mine. Kalen stiffened, then relaxed, his hand stroking Julian's hair. Yours, huh? Forever, Julian murmured. If you'll have me. Kalen kissed the top of his head. I told you, Tauros never defaults. You're staying. The upper city believed Julian Vane died in a tragic botched rescue. They held a funeral with an empty casket. But in Sector 4, in a renovated loft with a reinforced door, a new life began. It wasn't soft. It wasn't clean. It smelled of motor oil and rain. But for the first time, the bird wasn't in a cage. He was flying with the hawk. And that is how the Prince of Pills became the queen of the scrapyard. If you enjoyed seeing Julian risk it all for his protector, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you have the guts to bluff a mafia boss to save the person you love? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.